Members, we're now live streaming.
Good evening and welcome to the meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. Please note this meeting is being streamed live to the internet. Please could all members ensure their microphone is set to mute unless they are speaking to reduce any background noise. It is important to remember that you may only speak when called by the chairman. Also ensure any other devices nearby are switched to silent mode as they can be distracting. Please can all members keep their video on at all times. And if a councillor does lose connection, the meeting will be paused for a period of 3 minutes to allow that councillor to rejoin the meeting. If the councillor is unable to do this after 3 minutes, the meeting will resume and the councillor will not be able to vote on that particular application. Members should use the raise hand button when they wish to speak. When it is your turn to speak, I will call your name and invite you to speak. Once you have spoken, I will flatten your hand. All votes will be taken by roll call, where the name of each member is read out, and they must respond with either for, against, or abstain. I will only accept amendments to motions via the chat function, so it is clear for everyone what is being proposed. Right, so we'll start with the agenda. Agenda item 1 is apologies. We don't have any apologies, I don't think. Are we looking at that?
No apologies this evening, Chairman.
Thank you. Right. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Members of the committee should declare any interests which fall under the following categories: disclosable pecuniary interests, other significant interests, voluntary announcements of other interests. Are there any?
No.
Right, that's fine. So we move on to agenda item 3, minutes, which is to consider and approve as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 30th of July. Is everybody happy to approve those minutes?
Agree.
Yes,
Yeah.
I propose those, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Mallard. And seconded? Thank you, Councillor. And everybody in favour? Please show.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm included in that. Yes, thank you. Right. Trying to balance this on and do it at the same time. Right. So, just give me a moment. This is why I prefer using a desktop. I haven't got to do a balancing act. Right, so we are on to item number 4, which is appointment of temporary councillor, Brenzett Parish Council. And I believe, just wrote that down just now, didn't I? Yeah, here we are. And I believe Amandeep is going to take us through that one. Thank you, Amandeep.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, councillors. I am going to present agenda item 4, which deals with the appointment of a temporary councillor at Brenzett Parish Council. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, Brenzett Parish Council could not meet the requirements of quorum at a planned parish meeting on the 14th of September 2020. The Parish Council has a total of 5 seats for office. 2 of those seats have remained vacant after the conclusion of both the petition period to call an election, as well as advertising for co-option by the Parish Council. Of the 3 remaining councillors, 1 could not attend the meeting in September 20 because of a family emergency. With only 2 councillors left, the Parish Council could not function because it could not meet quorum requirements, as set out in Part 2 of Schedule 12 of the Local Government Act 1972, which is set out, councillors, in paragraph 1.3 of your report. the parish council approached the district council for assistance, and using powers under section 91 of the Local Government Act 1972, the principal authority was able to temporarily appoint to fill the vacancy. In view of the urgent need to appoint a temporary member of staff, the head of service used her urgency powers to make the appointment. The parish council could not suggest a member of the public from the parish council to act, so a district councillor agreed to step up and fulfil the role of the councillor for the meeting held on the 14th of September 2020. For information, Councillor Tony Hills filled this post. The Secretary of State has been notified of the appointment as required by legislation. Therefore, councillors, this report is to inform you of the temporary appointment to Brenzett Parish Council. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Amanda. Are there any questions, councillors? In that case,
No.
we are, sorry, did somebody raise something?
I just said, no, I'm entirely happy with that.
Oh, right, okay.
Councillor Martin, you have Councillor Laura Davison.
Yes, I've just seen it now, thank you. Yes, Councillor Davison.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, thanks for the report. I just wanted to clarify. So as I understand it, after the temporary appointment, somebody has been more permanently put into position now. And does that mean there's still one vacancy?
Yeah, that's correct, Councillor Davison. So the Tony Hills was at the meeting to be able to co-opt a parishioner to the council. So you're correct. The remaining vacancy is still up for co-option.
Thank you. Are there any more questions?
Thank you.
Right, in that case, the recommendation is to receive and note the report, to note the use by the head of paid service of her urgency powers to make a temporary appointment, which you've heard about, to Brenzett Parish Council, pursuant to S91 Local Government Act 1972. Can I have a proposal for that, please? Thank you, Councillor Berry, seconder. Thank you, Councillor Shub. Right, all in favour, please show. Councillor Mallard, you're in favour?
Would you like me to do a quick roll call, Councillor Martin?
No, I think we're
Okay.
done now. It's unanimous. Thank you.
Okay.
Right, so we will move on now to item number 5. And that is the internal audit progress report from the head of East Kent Audit Partnership. And I have down that Chris Parker is going to present this for us. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. The report before you is the normal internal audit update report that shows the work that's been completed since the last committee report. It starts on page 13, but if I can ask you to turn to page 17, this shows the 5 main reports that have been completed in the period. There were 3 substantial assurances, 1 reasonable assurance and 1 reasonable limited. The reasonable limited assurance was licensing, which is shown on page 21. The main reason for the partial limited assurance on this particular function was due to a lack of a cost neutral exercise. This is similar to taxes, which was brought to this committee in December 2019 with a similar thing showing that they also needed a cost neutral exercise to be undertaken. On page 23, this shows the follow-up reports that have been completed for the period. In the table showing there was just 1, which is substantial assurance. However, I would like to update the committee that very recently there have been some more follow-ups undertaken, and these include taxes, which is now reasonable, GDPR, which is now reasonable as well, and also East Kent housing lifts. There was a second follow-up done of that area, and that was also raised to reasonable assurance. The most recent one, which has been issued this week, was East Kent housing fire safety, which forms part of the tenant health and safety aspect. Now, this originally was a no assurance level, and this now has been raised just to limited assurance. To give you a little bit of background to the reason for that, it says, this progress report has been issued this week as limited assurance. There has been a good deal of work undertaken and 4 of the 6 recommendations are fully implemented. There has been discussion over why we were not able to raise the assurance further to reasonable, and it is held by East Kent Audit Partnership that the sheer volume of work required for the fire safety is essentially why this cannot be raised above limited at this time. However, we do recognise all the improvements that have been made to the system of internal control. These are also shown on page 26 to show that they were the ones that were outstanding and were waiting follow-up to be undertaken. Going back to page 23, this shows a comment on the internal audit plan. As mentioned previously before, there was some impact on internal audit work regarding the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic period, and there have been some adjustments to the plan, and this is shown on page 27, where some audits have been required to be deferred to cover the work that was undertaken on the COVID virus and community hub work that we undertook. And also now you will see that there are an additional 30 days which are shown under the housing systems. This is where the balance of the days for East Kent Housing is coming back into your own internal audit plan from the 1st of October. The 3 reviews that we have potentially penciled in for this time at the moment is tenant health and safety compliance, data quality and leaseholder services. Now these possibly could change, but they're the ones that we have down at this moment in time. The following pages after that show East Kent Housing and also show the balanced scorecard information with the performance figures for the period. Those are the main highlights of this report, and I'll be pleased to take any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Peter. Any questions, councillors? I don't see any hands raised. No. Right, in that case, the recommendations are to receive a note.
Chairman, you have Councillor Shube and Councillor Davison with raised hands.
There's something wrong with my system. I do apologise. Right, Councillor Shube. You're muted.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of quick questions. On page 28, there's audits for climate change and the creditors duplicate testing. I wonder, could you in particular just talk us briefly through what the climate change audit involved? And could you also just tell us that column sort of says the assurance level and there's nothing stated for those 2. So if you could just talk us through those briefly, that would be great. Okay, thank you, Chair. If I can answer that.
Yes, please do.
The climate change actually was not a normal full audit. What was happening there, it was that was undertaken in the very early period of the COVID virus, when we were slightly restricted with the work that we could undertake. And so we decided to undertake some work doing background work to the area of climate change, which is going to be a future audit. So we were using the time to sort of bring some of the background work together so that we could actually preempt an audit which will probably feature in 21-22 period. The creditors duplicate testing is some work, again, it's not a standard audit, it's some work that we do on a regular basis, where we take the information from the creditor system and we run tests on the invoices to see if there's any potential duplicate payments within those periods. And what happens then is we feed that information back to the creditors team and the finance team, who will then look at it in a bit more depth and make sure that there aren't any duplicate payments. If there are any duplicate payments there, then they will be chased back through the departments and refunds would be sought. So that's why there's no normal assurances shown for those two.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now ask Councillor Davison.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to come back to the East Kent Housing tenants' health and safety issues, which obviously we talked about in the committee last time. In the useful information you gave there in terms of an update on the work that's been done, you talked about the lifts and the fire safety, which I think you said come under the East Kent Housing Tenants Health and Safety part of the assurance. So I just wanted to be clear what is outstanding within that, and also in terms of a time frame for doing the work that you talked about. I think the sheer volume of work, what's the time frame for that, and within what time can we expect to see that situation improve, because obviously it's about health and safety.
Thank you. Peter, are you able to
Thank you.
answer?
If I take that initially, Chair. Yes, the tenants' health and safety, now all of the aspects of that original report have now been followed up. The only one that is standing at a low assurance is the fire safety. And as I said, that's purely down to the sheer scale of work that needs to be undertaken. I'm afraid I don't know the actual periods, how long that will be to be completed. But obviously from the 1st of October, all of those functions within the tenants' health and safety area will now obviously be coming back into the individual council. So they'll be coming back under Folkestone and Hythe now, obviously. As you can see, one of the 3 audits that we have suggested for going forward on the housing side is to look at the tenants' health and safety compliance. So it could well be that we will have another look at those before the end of the March period. That's the end of my knowledge on there. I'm not sure if Christine might be able to give you a little bit more information about possibly the periods of work that it may take to undertake and complete the fire safety area.
Thank you. Christine, are you able to confirm anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the question. I think we have been reporting for a number of years some control areas within fire safety. The email exchange that my colleague referred to with East Kent Housing, they feel we're being pretty harsh by not raising the assurance level at this time, given that the internal control system has improved. And I think our standpoint is one that, you know, the wonderful thing about internal audit is everything is very precise, and here we have a sample and we measure it, and then we come up with a very subjective assurance level, which is an opinion, and of course, you know, because it's subjective, it is open to challenge, and we're often challenged, and this is a robust challenge saying, you know, we recognise that the control system now does address the risks identified, puts actions in to mitigate those risks and challenge that whole process. And we're acknowledging those improvements and we're acknowledging those internal controls. And I think through your scrutiny committees members, you will have seen the numbers and the volumes of the compliance issues being reported under all of the health and safety issues. When we do this audit, we tend to pick what we feel to be the most high risk areas, but there's probably about 22 compliance streams being measured through this very important service that's being supplied to obviously the tenants. So we have had that debate, and I think we want to recognise the improvements. That said, of course, the original audit was in September 19. We were delayed doing our follow-up because a lot of the follow-up did depend on getting contracts let. So some of this fire safety work could actually get underway. And then with obviously COVID-19, there have been further delays. So we were only invited in, as we've had this ongoing sort of debate, when can we come in, when can we come in? There's no point in going in too early to do a follow-up to only confirm the things we found last time are still outstanding. So it's really, as you recall from my annual report, saying these things are overdue and it's been quite intolerable, really, the delays. We're now at the point where we're saying, well, things have really moved on. But we feel quite strongly that to give it a reasonable assurance at this time would be giving a sense of comfort that we think is probably just missing, in the sense that there is a volume of work to get through. So it's very, very pleasing to say the control systems are in place, the work is happening, and it's being measured, and the risks clearly where there is work that's needed, and it might be capital work, it might be a big project. So there is longer delay, but mitigation measures are being put in place. So that's the really key message, I think, that we do need to report back and acknowledge the progress that has been made in the methodology and the management of this whole risk area. So that's really a key message to you, members. Your scrutiny teams, committees will see the detailed reports on this. And of course, that's where really internal audit hands it back over to the management, the people who are responsible for this. In terms of your timescale for when all this work will be completed, really it's back to the council now, well, from tomorrow, when things change. And it's clearly something that the housing regulator, obviously the housing board, and now the 4 separate councils, as they take it back in, will be measuring going forward. I hope that helps, but I'm happy to take any further questions.
Thank you, Christine. Councillor Davison, does that answer your questions? Hello?
Yeah, that was very
Councillor, can you hear me?
helpful. The updated reports shared with this committee as well, so we can see the detail.
Thank you. I have you down to speak again, Councillor Shube, is that correct?
Thank you. Just one other quick question. On page 27, I think it is, obviously quite a few things have had to be deferred. I was wondering, could you just talk us through the decision on deferring the emergency planning and business continuity audit?
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Chair. I can take that one if you're okay with
You deal with that, thank you. Yeah.
Just trying to find my right. The emergency planning and business continuity review was originally going to be undertaken in late 2019-20, but then at the time when we were arranging this, obviously it then got caught up in the early part of the COVID-19 situation, and the fact that the relevant officer would be actually dealing with the pandemic information on behalf of the council was obviously very busy at the time. It was decided to sort of defer that one for some period of time. The review does remain on the audit plan, and it will be undertaken at a later date. It was just decided to give the department and the officers some assistance by not actually deciding to come in and audit them at that time, and just to sort of help them that way. What we will be able to do is to go in at a later date when things have calmed down a little bit more, and actually then it will be quite useful to be able to look back to see how they actually have done and how they actually did work during the COVID-19 situation.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Davison, I have you down to speak again. Go ahead.
Yes, thanks. I think I'm not sure whether you heard what I was saying before, but just asking if the updated follow-up reports could be shared with this committee as well around the tenants' health and safety. And then I just wanted to ask about the days in your table that have been put against the different reviews that have been carried out. I just want to check I've understood it correctly, because in terms of the reviews that you've shared with us that have been carried out within this period of time, Otterpool Park governance is listed as having no days attached to it, and same with dog enforcement. But reports have been produced in this time. So just a bit unclear about what time has gone into producing those reports.
Right. Yes, thank you, Chair. I can answer that. The Otterpool Park governance and the dog enforcement on page 28. The bulk of the work for those two reviews were actually completed in 1920, and this was just the finishing off. What has happened is the draft reports have been produced and the bulk of the work had been undertaken in the previous year. And what has happened is there's been a little bit of a lag, partly due to the situation at the moment, to getting those reports finalised. And what has actually happened is the reports have been finalised, but they would have been finalised after the 30th of June. So what's happened is they're showing as finalised in here so that we could bring them to the committee in this committee report. But you will see at the next update of the audit plan, there will be a small amount of time shown where the reports have been finalised. It's just that the time has actually been used probably in July and August just to complete the reports and get them issued. But we didn't want to delay the reports coming to the committee, so we've actually sort of jumped the gun slightly and reported them now. But the time taken will show up in the next audit report.
Thank you, Chris. I have Councillor Mullard to speak next.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Page 26, I'm looking at East Kent housing fraud. I was not on the committee in March 2019, so I'm a little bit in the dark. But the last column says follow-up action due, and it talks about a pilot anti-fraud scheme in conjunction with Ashford Borough Council. Does that mean this scheme hasn't started yet, or it will start, or if it started, is there anything to report on that? That was all.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could take that one, it's Christine. Yes, so we did the piece of work as a usual piece of work across the 4 councils, and at the time some of the tenancy, anti-fraud and anti-corruption responsibilities rested with the East Kent Housing, and some of the responsibilities rested with the 4 councils. So it was a cross-cutting piece of work. There were many recommendations, and as a result it was really pleasing to see that the 4 councils came together and said, well, let's have a fresh look at this and think about how we can learn from our neighbours. And at Ashford Borough Council they have a counter-fraud team who have been achieving some great successes with some of the work that they were undertaking. We entered into dialogue with them, and actually it was a wonderful idea to try and run this pilot, and even better, members, it was to be paid for by savings coming from the East Kent Audit Partnership that we had accrued on your behalf through our efficiencies that we had undertaken. Work started in earnest to draft an agreement between the 4 councils, and we were all set to start a pilot, we thought, in January of this year. There was a slight delay when the draft agreement then entered there was some issues over the GDPR which hadn't been thought of, and the agreement entered to the legal department. So then that involved 4 legal departments to obviously ensure they were all happy with it. I think the latest position is that the 4 legal departments have now all signed up to the agreement. It was all to do with who was the data processor and who was the data owner and who owned the data, because obviously we were asking effectively Ashford Borough Council to then look at our data. So we were obviously ensuring that all of that was correct before we even started. So the latest position that I'm aware of, and obviously then through April, well, March to June, even the Ashford counter fraud team were obviously redeployed, as were most people, to working in the hub and community work. So the latest position that I'm aware of is that we're ready to go. The agreements have been signed, and Ashford will be stepping in. But I will get an update for you members at the next meeting, because it's something dear to our hearts, and clearly it was always going to be an agreement with the 4 separate councils and Ashford, though, just so the fact that East Kent Housing has changed won't affect this agreement. It's something where we can learn from. And I mean, even if when we measure tenancy fraud, it's usually low volume but high value, because it's the number of social housing units that we're talking about. So even if one council house is brought back into effective and proper use, where maybe there's a subletting or something worse going on, then clearly that has a big impact on social housing. So it's an optimistic look at how we can learn from work that other counter fraud specialists have developed their expertise, and from there see where that leads to. I hope that answers your questions of what's being planned. It was a great plan. It just unfortunately got slightly knocked off course by both the GDPR aspect and the COVID pandemic.
Thank you for that. Does that answer your questions, Councillor Mullard?
Yes, I think it does, Chairman.
Thank you. Now, I have Councillor Davison to have a third lot of questioning. Not sure how long we're going to continue with this, but do carry on.
I think this is my last one, Chair, if that helps. It was just about the process of following up on the recommended actions that come out of the reviews. I'm thinking particularly in terms of the Opportunitas suggestions set out in the report. And also, I think, if I've understood the table correctly, the follow-up on the business rate relief topic is still showing as there's one outstanding action that hasn't been completed. I'm just wondering if we know when that is going to be followed up, and what the process of tracking through the improvements coming out of the audits is. Will it be reported back to the next committee, for example, in terms of any changes on the Opportunitas structures, as an example?
Chris, is that something you can deal with?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to recap on the overall thing with the follow-ups, is any of the main reports that we undertake and which come out with recommendations, as sometimes there are some that actually are substantial with no recommendations, but the ones that do have recommendations, we would normally follow up probably 3 to 6 months afterwards, unless there's a particular date that's been agreed with the managers to make it a longer time scale, and they will be reported back to yourself, and they are the ones that are shown in section 3. Whereas the business rate relief one, we have done the follow-up that we will do. We normally only do one follow-up. It would only be if it was, for instance, like the East Kent Housing Tenants Health and Safety, where it was either still a no or a limited assurance, that we would then do a further follow-up for the particularly serious ones. So in relation to the business rates relief, we would be finished from our point of view now. What happens is we basically reported that back to management, to the senior managers and the directors, and it's for them to make sure that that work is actually taken forward. Quite often we find with the follow-ups, some of the recommendations may have just slipped slightly, and often they are partially undertaken. They're just not fully completed, so they are well on their way. I can have a look at the business rate relief one and come back to you separately, just to advise you whether how that one is going. But we would not normally go back and do another follow up at this stage on a substantial follow up report.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay. Something's gone wrong with my system again. I don't appear to have any other councillors wishing to speak. So, but I'll just ask you now verbally if anybody has or not. No, I'm not. You're not showing in any way. So the recommendation is to receive a note report AUG 20/05 and to note the results of the work carried out by the East Kent Audit Partnership. I'd like a proposer for that, please. Proposed by Councillor Shue. Thank you. And a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Berry. All in favour, just show your hand. That will be sufficient. Thank you very much. Councillor Mallard, you're in favour?
I'm in favour, yes.
Thank you. Right, that's carried. Thank you very much. And thank you for all the information being provided. So we now move on to item 6. Which is the audit. Oh, no, wrong one again. Sorry about this. I just cannot do this with the. Wait a second. Right, item 6. Yes, still correct. Item 6, the audit findings of Folkestone High District Council. And I have Paul Dossett to go through this. Have I got that right?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So we have our audit findings report. It contains 2 quite distinct areas. The financial statements work, which Mark Chang will take us through in a minute, and then come back to me for the value for money work. So Mark will kick off on the financial statements work.
Thank you, Mark. Over to you.
Chair. The main thing to draw your attention to with regard to the financial statements are the findings on page 7 of our report, which I think is page 43 of the pack, under the COVID-19 financial statement level risk that we've identified.
Yep.
So the pandemic has had a major impact on housing and investment markets at the end of March, as we well know, which has meant that valuations carried out at that date have been subject to what we call estimation uncertainty. So the council's valuers have declared that material uncertainties exist with regard to the operational land and buildings, the dwellings and investment property portfolios at the balance sheet date, essentially stating that less reliance can be placed on those valuations. So what we've done is we've included an emphasis of matter paragraph in the audit opinion to highlight the council's disclosure on that issue. And it's also important to note that that does not constitute a qualification to the opinion. It's something that has been applied to all local government bodies where there have been material valuations. It's also worth noting an uncertainty has also been declared by the Kent Pension Fund in the valuation of their pooled and direct property investments, which sit in their net asset statement. Given that Folkestone has a material share of those assets in its own underlying pension liability, a material uncertainty is also deemed to exist within the valuation of that liability. So again, that's referred to in our opinion and as an emphasis of matter, which is not a qualification. Other things to draw your attention to in the report include our work on the going concern assessment, which is summarised on page 53 of the pack. So as auditors, we are required to satisfy ourselves about the appropriateness of management's use of the going concern assumption in preparation of the financial statements, which has been particularly important this year, given the uncertainty that's arisen due to COVID-19. So we've carried out a review of cash flow forecast, the budget, the medium-term plan, and the arrangements in place behind those, as well as the council's response to COVID-19, which has led us to the conclusion that the going concern assumption, as stated in the accounts, is appropriate for the council. We've made one recommendation to management regarding the valuation of land and buildings, which is on page 69 of the pack. The full exercise for the valuation itself wasn't carried out at the balance sheet date, which increased the risk that the assets are not materially fairly stated at the year end. Although we have satisfied ourselves that this year it's not the case, but we've made the recommendation on the date of the valuation going forwards. The audit itself is awaiting an assurance letter from Kent Pension Fund before it can be formally concluded, and the closing down of some review queries. But the work on all significant risks is now complete. The finance team have been hugely responsive to audit and have worked very cooperatively with us. So, and what has been quite an exceptional and difficult year for audit generally. So we thank them for that. Yeah, and that concludes my presentation on the financial statements part of the report. I'll pass on to Paul to talk you through value for money.
Thank you very much, Mark. Paul, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mark. So on value for money, it's a bit complicated because I've got two pieces on value for money, and rather strangely, I will start on page 57 with the 1920 assessment. And when we were preparing our audit plan for you, we originally obviously didn't take into account COVID-19, so we had to provide an update on that. And I think what that obviously made us reflect on was the importance of financial sustainability for the council and indeed for all councils in the light of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we've done some detailed run-throughs of a range of things that are relevant, including your medium-term financial statement, the impact of the changes proposed in respect of East Kent housing, the broader impact of COVID-19 and your response to COVID-19, opportunities and the broader sort of capital plan, because obviously that's very important in terms of the long-term sustainability. Capital is both a positive in terms of what that means, what that can generate in future, but obviously it's a risk if councils borrow beyond beyond their capability of paying back, and we do see that at some places. And obviously the Ossipole Park Garden Town development as well. So there's a big picture swathe of issues that relates to the financial sustainability of the council. So we've looked at that in detail. We're able to conclude that that has been a robust process, that the council has clearly addressed the challenges that it faces both pre and post COVID, and recognised the importance of strong financial governance in its overall consideration of financial sustainability. So in respect of that area, at this juncture, we're contemplating providing an unqualified value for money conclusion in respect of that particular year. When we look at 1819, which is on page 62 onwards, one of the things you may recall from last year, the auditor last year, my colleague at the time, Elizabeth Jackson, was not able to conclude on the value for money work that year because the various issues identified by internal audit in respect of East Kent Homes and obviously the gas contracts and servicing and all the issues that members will be very, very familiar with were just being sort of developed then in terms of how they would be assessed going forward. So at that point in time, we determined that we would not give our value for money conclusion until a certain number of questions and processes had been followed by us to enable us to give that conclusion. What we've documented over page 63 and onwards is really the story of what has happened here. You'll be very familiar with from internal audit reports and from the reports that the members have received in terms of how the council is taking this matter forward and the various events that have led to what's happening tomorrow in terms of bringing services back into the council. And our view about this, taking an assessment of the year as a whole, because the majority of the, I suppose you would want to call the negative events happened in 1819. we obviously have to give a conclusion on that year, and because we took the view that in totality, the council's arrangements for the supervision and management of East Kent housing led to some negative outcomes, which are well documented. We've decided to go with an except for qualification of value for money for the 18-19 year. But what we have reflected in this assessment is that the response to these issues has been a very strong response, because the issues were identified, new supervisory arrangements were put in place in respect of East Kent housing, and the contract monitoring arrangements were beefed up considerably, and the council then took a step back, which sometimes we don't see, to consider not only addressing the on the ground issues that had to be addressed, but taking a strategic view about what the future of housing management was in the district. And obviously that's led to the decision to bring the services back in-house. And I think if you reflect on the timescales here, I mean, these are big and difficult issues to deal with. Reflect on the timescales from when we were first of all made aware of these issues last early summer to now. We are quite happy there's been a robust process in place to address those challenges. Clearly there'll be more work to do, but we're satisfied that the governance around that has been strong. But of course, we have to give a value for money conclusion on the 18-19 year. And when we look at the outcomes in respect to what happened in 18-19, we reached that conclusion that an except for qualified value for money conclusion will be reached. For members who aren't aware of the various ranges we have on value for money conclusions, we have three options essentially. We have unqualified, we have except for, and we have adverse. Now, adverse is quite bad, because adverse means there's lots of issues, or there's one overwhelming issue that clouds everything else out. Unqualified is obvious what that means. Except for qualification means, in our view, the value for money arrangements were sound, except for this particular matter. So you have to put that matter into context. This is obviously one part of the council's role that we were concerned about. It's not qualified the various other parts of your role, and particularly from an audit point of view, what we're interested in often is financial sustainability. So we're not thinking about financial sustainability in this qualification. We're thinking about the specific issues that occurred in respect of these contracts as flagged by internal audit. So I'll stop there, and then Mark and myself will be happy to take any questions that members have.
Thank you very much for that, Paul. I'm sure you've all been busy preparing your questions. I can't see anybody on my screen. I don't know what's happened to it. Oh, wait a minute. Yes, it is working now. Yes, I have Councillor Davison.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the report. Yeah, my question was just around what you were going through there, Paul, in terms of the 18-19 position. So are you saying that, in your view, enough work has been carried out, and you have seen evidence of enough work carried out to be able to come to a view on the 18-19, and then that it has been sufficiently addressed that it doesn't have an impact for the current process? Is that correct?
Yeah, so what I'm saying about 18-19 is clearly the outcomes of the arrangements the council put in place were poor outcomes. But then what I'm saying, both in terms of reflecting on that, the issues that were put in place to address those poor outcomes have been robust, and have obviously those arrangements are being put into place during 1920 and obviously into 2021. And it's that I'm satisfied with as arrangements. I mean, obviously we don't we don't go into the minutiae of particular servicing contracts and things like that, but the arrangements, and I particularly, when I reflect on arrangements, I'm looking at things like contract reports to members by officers, some of the new arrangements that the council put in place in terms of officer focus as well to address this issue. These are all the areas I've considered in reaching my conclusion on 1920. So I guess, Councillor, if I was not satisfied that those arrangements had been put in place and addressed, and for whatever reason the council was not addressing these issues, you would have ended up with a qualified value for money conclusion in 1920 as well on that particular issue. So I am satisfied that in terms of the arrangements put in place, and our work is all about arrangements, not about detailed operational issues, but arrangements, that an issue has occurred, the council has reacted to that issue, members have been fully briefed, detailed plans have been put in place, and in this particular case, strategically, a decision was taken that the best way to manage, effectively risk manage and provide the service in the best way going forward was to bring it in-house. So I'm satisfied that gets me to a place where 1920 I can sign off as unqualified.
Thank you for that, Paul. Does that answer your questions, Councillor Davison?
That's helpful, thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Mullard to speak next.
No, sorry, Chairman. Perhaps I've stuck my hand up wrongly. No comment.
Thank you. I don't actually show on my system anybody else to speak. Have I missed anybody? No? Right, in that case, thank you to Paul again and to Mark and for councillors for their contribution. The recommendation is to receive a note report AUG/20/08, to consider and note Grant Thornton's audit findings for Folkestone and Hythe District Council year ended the 31st of March 2020 report, and to approve the letter of representation, authorise the chairman and vice chairman to sign the letter on behalf of the council. And again, I'd like a proposer for that, please, so that we can move on. Thank you, Councillor Berry. And a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Shube. And all in favour, please show.
Yep.
Right, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. So now we move on to item 7, which I understand is going to be presented by Cherry Ireland, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to present agenda item 7, which is the statement of accounts for 2019-20. The draft statement of accounts is included within the agenda pack, which start on page 85. And this committee is delegated to review and approve the financial statements, the external auditor's opinion and reports to members, and monitor management action in response to the issues raised by external audit. As outlined in section 1 of the covering report, the council is obliged to comply with the provisions of the Accounts and Audit Coronavirus Amendments Regulations 2020, which require the section 151 officer to sign and date the statement of accounts no later than the 31st of August instead of the 31st of May, and for the council by way of resolution to consider and approve the statement of accounts as well as publish them alongside the opinion issued by the external auditor before the 30th of November instead of the previous 31st of July deadline. The draft accounts were signed, dated and published on the 18th of June and were presented to this committee at its meeting on the 30th of July, at which time the external audit was underway. The audit is now substantially complete, as just advised, and there have been no material changes to the financial statements. There are some minor changes to disclosure notes which have been made, and these are detailed in the audit findings report, which has just been presented by Grant Thornton. And the copy of the accounts that are included at Appendix 1 of this agenda pack include all known changes. The committee is therefore asked to approve the statement of accounts for 2019-20 as presented, and I'm very happy to take any questions the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Cherry. Again, I'm not showing on my system. I don't know if it's missed. Are there any questions from councillors? Apparently not. Oh, wait a minute. Yes, we have Councillor Davison. ask a question. You're over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, at the last meeting, I asked a question about the funding for Otterpool, and I think helpfully Cheryl had sent through some more information after the meeting, which related, I think I'm struggling slightly to access the right place in the agenda, but I think from memory it was note 22 to the accounts that sought to explain where the Otterpool funding sat in the accounts. But I just wondered if Cheryl will be able to talk us through that so that I'm clear.
Cheryl, are you able to do that?
Oh, yes, sorry, I just unmute myself. Yes, certainly. So yes, you're correct. It is note 22 in the accounts. The borrowing that I think the question, if I remember rightly, was about borrowing relating to the Otterpool land purchase. And the borrowing is a combination of long and short-term borrowing, but individual loans are not linked to specific capital schemes. So we borrow to meet the overall cost of the capital programme rather than a specific capital scheme. So £35 million of external borrowing was taken up between January and March 2020, which included some funding to cover the purchase of the Otterpool land. And the 35 million is included within both a combination of long and short-term borrowing that's included in note 22 there. So I'm just checking my record. So I believe 5 million is included in the long-term borrowing, which in note 22 will be within that 58 million there. And then the remaining 30 million is included within the short-term borrowing balance at the end of 31st of March 20.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Cheryl. Councillor Davison, do you wish to follow up? Or?
No, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Again, I'm not showing that on my system. I hope I haven't missed anybody, but nobody else wishing to speak? Thank you. Right, in that case, we are asked to receive and note the report AUG/20/07 and to approve the statement of accounts for 2019-20. And I will require a proposal and a seconder, please. Councillor Shug, thank you. To propose and to second it?
I'll second that, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Millard. Right, all in favour, please show. That's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you everybody for their contribution. We now move on to item number 7, which I understand that Amandeep and possibly a colleague is going to present for us. Over to you.
Oh, actually, Chair, it's Charlotte. I'm going to present this particular item. I think Amandeep might have kittens if I hand over to her at this late stage.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's my mistake. No, I do apologise. Yeah,
no problem.
Carry on. Yes, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. So this report provides an update to the current corporate risk register. You'll see within the document that we have identified 14 risks within the corporate risk register. This is solely focused on high-level strategic corporate risks. There are obviously a number of risks identified separately in departmental and project risk registers, but the focus of this report is the corporate risk register itself. So as outlined in 2.2 in the report, there are 14 risks identified. That's an additional 2 risks to the previous update to the corporate risk register, which came forward to this committee in March. The key changes have been outlined in 2.3 of the report. And in summary, there's been a reduction in risk C1, which is organisational instability. That's reflective of the programme of work progressing on the transformation programme, changes in the job market, and progress on a number of working group work streams, such as the corporate plan and the governance work stream. So that risk has been reduced. There are a number of risks within the corporate risk register which have increased, and it's fair to say that COVID has had a significant impact on the profile of risk. So covering those specifically, The risk C2, shortage of skills to deliver the agenda, that risk has been increased to reflect the impact of the additional duties being placed upon the council as a result of the pandemic. Additionally, we've increased C4, which is the medium-term financial uncertainty. As you'll be well aware, the impact of the pandemic has been both on the wider economy, but also the council's own resources, and there have been delays announced to local government funding reform. We are undertaking work at the moment on a revised medium-term financial strategy to help manage those risks, but it is a risk to the council at this point. We've increased risk C7, which relates to the capacity and resilience of our key partners, recognising the wider impacts of COVID-19 on partners such as the NHS and the voluntary sector, as well as other key partners within the district, such as the leisure trusts. Finally, we've introduced a new risk specifically on COVID-19, noting the significance of it. And that has gone into the register as a high level risk. There is a number of streams of work underway, which you'll be aware of in terms of the recovery plan. But we have identified that as a specific risk at this time. In addition, we've also added a risk into the register related to Brexit and wider market conditions due to the impending exit late this year, early next year. That will add further complexities to the economic market that the council operates within, and also potentially logistical emergency planning issues for the council to address. There are 3 further risks where we've reflected a score change, and they relate to the delivery of the transformation project, which has now been reduced to a low level risk to reflect the progress of that particular project. And 2 risks, C10 and C13, which have a particularly heavy focus around landlord failure and risk to non-compliance. These risks have been reduced to a point. They haven't been reduced to medium or low level risks yet, but we do feel that work is well underway, and we expect the trajectory of those risks to continue to come down. So we have noted a small reduction to the risk for those particular areas. As you know, we consider our risk register to be a continually changing dynamic document, so we'll continue to monitor it, update it, and we'll be reporting again to the next committee, when I anticipate we'll be bringing an update to the corporate risk strategy as well for your consideration for its annual review. I'm very happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Gemma. Councillors? I don't see any hands raised again, and I now see one on both systems. Councillor Shoup, your questions?
Thank you. Could you just talk us through whether climate change has been considered as a risk and your thoughts on that for inclusion on the risk register? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Shoup. We don't have it currently on the risk register as a separately identified risk. There is reference to some of the challenges that we encounter internally, such as identifying suitable resources to conduct that work, but we don't have it identified separately as a risk. I'm happy to consider it for inclusion within the next review. We do try to keep the corporate risk register fairly focused, and just because it's not in the corporate risk register does not mean it doesn't feature elsewhere, as I said, within departmental registers, but very happy to consider it for the next review.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gemma. I now have Councillor Davison to speak.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation, Charlotte. I just wanted to, one was a sort of general question in terms of how is it determined what risks go on to the corporate risk register, certain things rather than other things, for example. And then in terms of understanding the schedule. I think the report talks about extreme risks versus low risks. And it would just be helpful to be clear how that breaks down in the chart. And then the relationship between the pre-mitigation scores and the post-mitigation scores. So, for example, on the C1, organisational instability, it looks like the pre-mitigation and the post-mitigation scores are the same. Does that mean that the measures that are being put in place to reduce the risk aren't effective, or why is that the case? Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll try and take each of those in turn. In terms of how a risk is determined, it is a matter of judgment. Now, we work within a determined strategy and policy framework which the council's adopted, which I'm aware some of you are new to this committee, so I'm very happy to sort of share that offline. You may not have seen sight of it if you weren't on the committee the last time and we considered it on an annual basis. So how they're determined: for the corporate risk register, we have a focus on a number of areas. So it tends to be linked to key strategic documents, such as the local plan, the corporate plan, the medium-term financial strategy, but it's not limited to those. We'd also consider council decisions or cabinet decisions which have significant significance to the council, and one of the key areas that is a source of identification of corporate risks for us is debate at management team. We regularly discuss emerging risks that the council's facing, and they do inform the corporate risk register on a regular basis. But it does ultimately come down to a matter of judgment, what's included. And at times there will be risks which will be escalated from the departmental risk registers and will flow upwards because they will become so significant that they are no longer a departmental issue, that they actually have a bearing on the council in a wider sense. So, so those are sort of broadly how we would identify and determine risks. The extreme low scoring, again, that information is all contained within the strategy itself. But very broadly, if you were to look at Appendix 2, which I can't give you the page of, but it's the very last page of the pack. I can't see the page. Oh, 229, page 229. Probably the colour coding is the easiest way to identify it. So the green shaded risks would be considered low risks. So those are where there is a either the likelihood and the impact combined come to no more than a score of 6, effectively. The extreme level risks are the risks which are shaded red in that diagram, and therefore have a score of at least 12 in the matrix, 12 or 16. So the level of the risk is determined by the scoring, so the likelihood and the impact. In terms of the current score and the pre-mitigation pre-mitigation and post-mitigation scores. So you could argue that once a risk has been reduced, where the sorry, I'm just realizing those two columns are titled incorrectly, which I think might actually be part of the issue. So the scores nearest to the actions in place are actually the post-mitigation scores. Apologies, councillors, the column titles are wrong. But if we just take C1, where a score with the mitigations that you've put in place reaches your target effectively, then there is an argument you may remove it from the risk register. If you feel that you have placed all of the actions, you've put all of the actions that would help mitigate that score are in place and they're working effectively, and you've therefore brought down the level of risk, there is an argument where you might choose to remove it from the corporate risk register. That would depend on the volatility, and I would never remove something from the corporate risk register without returning it to the committee to indicate the trajectory of that risk and how it's come down. But we may choose at the next revision of this, if nothing in terms of organisational instability has changed, if we are saying that our target level score has been reached, then we may well remove that if there's nothing new to say, because as I mentioned earlier, the risk register should be dynamic and we should only be reporting through the corporate risk register the most pressing risks at a point in time, so that the committee are effectively focused on the most important risks facing the council at this point.
Thank you for that.
Could I just
Anybody
come back in, Chair?
you want to come back in? Yes, certainly.
Yeah, just obviously it'd be helpful to get a corrected copy.
Yes.
And just wanted to be clear what the box on the right hand side is then. If the one in the middle should be the post mitigation score, what's the one that says post mitigation score at the moment? And just when you spoke, Charlotte, about the target,
yeah,
that you're trying to get to, what does that, how is that reflected in the numbers?
yes, sorry. So the scores on the far right hand side are the targets, so that's what we're aiming for. The score in the centre, the ones where some of them are shaded red, that's our current assessment of the risk. The titles have totally confused this table, and I'm sorry, I didn't see it until you pointed it out in the committee. But yes, we absolutely can get you out an updated version, which makes that much clearer.
Yeah, that makes much more sense now. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm not showing unless I'm missing it. Anybody else wishing to speak? Right, thank you very much for your participation, everybody. So the recommendation is to receive and note the updated corporate risk register. So again, I'm looking for somebody to propose and somebody to second it, as usual. Thank you, Councillor Berry. And a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Shube. All in favour?
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor. So that's unanimous. Thank you very much. And I believe that's the last item on the agenda. I'm sorry my IT was playing up again. I think we'll all be glad we can have real meetings, but thank you for your patience and thank you all very much for attending, and stay safe and good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.